Hey, it's Greg Grunberg, Snap Wexley from Heroes, and Commander Finnegan of Yorktown from a little thing called Star Trek, and you are kneeling before the pod.
Kneel Before Blog presents Kneel Before Pod.
Hello and welcome to Kneel Before Pod, the podcast that is trying out our new robot legs. I'm your host Craig, and this year for Star Wars Day, may the 4th be with you, we are going to discuss some episodes of Clone Wars. We'll get into which ones shortly, although if you've read the title then you'll probably know. First up, he has spent the last year thinking of nothing but vengeance while I can't remember who he is. It's Andrew, hello.
Hello, please excuse me, I am thinking violent thoughts.
Also joining, he may not be thinking such violent thoughts, he'll let us know. It's Angus, hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you whenever you're listening.
No violent thoughts?
Not as of yet.
It's early yet though.
There's always time.
Maybe you picked up a bounty that you're now pursuing, the bounty being appearing on this podcast.
Perhaps.
So for Star Wars Day, since we ran out of films a long time ago, we're just dipping our toe into the expanded, extended universe. I don't know, maybe that's a triggering phrase for some people depending on their affiliation with various things, but we're on Clone Wars at the moment, and we decided, based on last year's brief planning discussion at the end of the episode, that we were going to cover the return of Darth Maul. So we are discussing Season 4, Episode 21, Brothers, Season 4, Episode 22, Revenge, and Season 5, Episode 1, Revival. As always, we will start with our spoiler-free thoughts. I have no idea what Angus thinks of this after not liking the Clone Wars movie last year, so we'll come to him last. We'll leave you in anticipation. Andrew, what did you think of these episodes?
I actually quite enjoyed them. I haven't actually rewatched the Clone Wars for years now, and the last animated Star Wars thing I actually remember watching was the end of Rebels. So it was actually quite nice dipping back into this world again.
Not the shorts, not the anime-inspired ones, or Bad Batch, or any of those?
Yeah, actually, I forgot about the Bad Batch. Okay, I might have it.
I just wanted to be technically accurate. I didn't want you to be misrepresented.
No, I appreciate that. And it was just great to be reminded just how expansive the whole Clone Wars saga is. And rewatching this a little bit, it's actually made me want to go back and rewatch the whole thing again.
You might think that's a good idea, but then you'll get to the Jar Jar arcs and stuff and be like, this is tough.
Just see we thing in the corner, Disney Plus. Next up, the Gungan General. Oh, okay then.
The episodes after this one is some kind of trilogy of episodes on the Mon Calamari planet. They're of middling quality as far as I'm concerned.
Sounds like a trap.
It does. It really does. I like these episodes as well. I remember being excited for the return of Maul at the time, because Maul is one of the coolest Star Wars characters ever, despite the fact he has 2 lines in The Phantom Menace, and that's him. And then he gets obviously cut in half, and then he's back here and made into a character. So I was excited to see him again. I like these episodes. I think this is some top-tier Clone Wars, but we'll get into why I think that in the spoiler section. So Angus, everyone has been in anticipation, wondering if you feel like the Clone Wars has improved since the cinematic release or not. So now that we're 4, almost 5 seasons in, technically we're at the start of its final season before it was cancelled, and then they aired the episodes that they made anyway for the 6th season on Netflix for a bit, and then cancelled it again, and then they uncancelled it again to give us a final season some years later. So you're towards the end of the first iteration of the show, the first run of the show. So what did you think of these 3 episodes?
Yeah, as you mentioned at the top, I'm coming at this almost completely fresh with almost zero Clone Wars experience, having only seen the Zero the Hutt movie twice now. And I've managed to avoid quite a lot of anything else about the Clone Wars, so I had 0 expectations other than the bits of lore that I'd managed to pick up about the return of Darth Maul. And I had expectations around that and what that might look like, just based on word of mouth, so that was interesting for me to encounter. I was pleasantly surprised that, as you've just been mentioning, there's different arcs, there's different focuses. I'm gathering this now as part of this conversation. I didn't think that we would be following non-Obi-Wan and Anakin characters for so much of the time. I was pleasantly surprised that there was very little Anakin in the episodes that we watched, which might be wrong of me to think. He might have redeemed himself as a character through this show. But anyway, I don't know anything about that. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by aspects of this. Yeah, without delving into spoilers, that's my initial take.
Cool. So an improvement on the last outing that you experienced then.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Cool. Well, that's good footing to start on then. Metal footing, perhaps.
Pause for laughter.
Insert. Ha ha ha.
I might have to insert a laugh because no one did. Maybe I'll just let the joke die, like perhaps Maul should have. Who knows? Let's get into it. Shall we go into the spoiler section of the Outer Rim?
Well, when you put it like that.
Punch it.
All right, let's start. We'll go through the episode sequentially. I feel like we'll jump around as we go, as we always do, but we need to start somewhere. So let's start with Brothers, which is Savage Opress on a violent quest to find his brother, who is Darth Maul, or just Maul. I don't think you can call him Darth, really, because he's not a Sith anymore, is he? He's just a weird rogue guy with a lightsaber.
I had a question about that. He's called Maul by his brother and his mother?
/ witch, whatever she is.
He's Darth Maul to the Sith, so was he ever dubbed Darth Maul? Does he have a dead name, or is there any other names he goes by?
I feel like the Night Sisters are setting him up for a pretty rough life just by dubbing him Maul.
A while back, I actually wrote an article for Screen Rant about this exact question, and basically he came up with a solution that Maul is actually his name, and when he was inducted into the Sith, because his name was already a negative aspect of humanity, as is the Sith naming convention, Palpatine just didn't bother renaming him.
I like that. If you've got a badass enough name already, you just go by Darth, give him a name.
Imagine the alternate universe where he went through Jedi training, so he's Jedi Knight Maul. Although I don't think Savage Opress was his original name. I haven't seen the arc where he's around for a while, but he's essentially imbued by a bunch of force magic and then forced to do the bidding of the Night Sisters, isn't he?
Basically, yeah.
I don't think they gave his name before that, but that's essentially what happened.
I've heard of this character. Forgive me if thinking that name sounds slightly ridiculous before you encounter the character. But Sauvage Opress, yeah, quite like that. And I had no idea what to expect, having only heard the name before. But what I do like is that he seems like a colour-swapped Mortal Kombat style version of Maul. So that seems good from a marketing perspective. We can probably make good bank out of that.
He's way bigger as well.
Oh, I like that too.
When he was introduced, I remember Obi-Wan going, "Oh, it can't be." And it's like, it's not. Just looks like him. But yeah, he's a big bruiser. He's got his double lightsaber. He's extremely violent, very angry all the time. And he's voiced by Clancy Brown, which is a positive for him, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Always.
It is.
Clancy Brown is really great when he shows up to voice these things that he just doesn't care about. He's done a lot of sci-fi, nerdy comic book stuff. And I think most of the time he just doesn't know anything about what he's voicing. He just does it.
That's how I do podcasts.
Me too. As I revealed at some point, I just read Wikipedia verbatim and then hoping no one notices. Or in this case, I'm reading Wikipedia verbatim.
Oh, of course.
So yeah, he's on a violent quest to find his brother. And, oh yeah, I did put the context there. So I did research this a couple of weeks ago when I was doing the agenda. Look at past me. Angus, you talked about how you'd heard of this character before. So the next point is he an interesting character or is he just noteworthy because of his associations? Did you find anything interesting about him here? Or did you just feel like he was a blunt instrument and very little else?
Well, we just kind of jump in this episode, so again, in a total vacuum that I exist in. I appreciate that I haven't encountered him before, don't know anything about his setup or his background or anything. I found him pretty single-minded, which is maybe a bit one-dimensional, but I liked that the episode was focused on his quest, because I wasn't expecting that at all. Again, I was coming at this thinking, okay, this is Star Wars The Clone Wars, this is about Jedi running around, going on missions and things. So yeah, I quite like the fact that this episode was all about him and his focus to find Maul.
Yeah, and you don't see much of Maul in the episode either. He doesn't appear until the very end. So most of it is Savage on a rampage and sniffing sand for clues, which took up a lot more time than you might want such a thing to take up. Andrew, do you think Savage is a interesting character, even though they're carefully trying to cover up that his first name is just Savage?
I think he had the potential to be, because as Angus said, he's defined by his single-minded quest to find Maul. But it's hard to be certain how much of that is a genuine desire to locate his brother, and how much of it is basically because he was commanded to do this by Mother Talzin, and he exists enthralled to the Night Sisters. So there was the potential to explore that kind of duality in looking into just how much of what he does is his own free will, essentially. But I don't really think they actually did that at all.
No, I don't think so. I feel like he functions well as a blunt instrument and a very powerful opponent, but very little else. And there's stuff they could have done with the whole him being manipulated and how things work on Dathomir and all that, but you don't really get much of that. I remember playing Fallen Order, and you go to Dathomir and you fight a bunch of Darth Maul-esque guys, but Dathomir at that point is just a dead planet. And I think when you return to Dathomir in Rebels, the Night Sisters are all ghosts, so the Emperor's taking care of them, so there won't be really much opportunity to explore Dathomir as such. They're just evil witches that like to do stuff. You do get some of it through Ventress, who was once one of them, I think. It's been a while since I've seen all that stuff, but she was affiliated with them in some way.
I think so, yes. I haven't watched them in years, I can only dimly remember.
Maybe I should have watched those episodes in preparation for this, but there we go, I didn't. So we're from the perspective of people that have missed a few episodes of Clone Wars and just tuned back in because we heard Darth Maul was in it. We were kids when the Phantom Menace came out, so we liked Darth Maul.
That's how it works.
That's what they're playing on here as well. Angus, what did you think of the first episode, it being teased from the beginning, basically, that he's going to find his brother Maul, and not getting to that until the end of the episode? It was actually teased that Maul was still out there in Savage's last appearance, but you don't return to that for basically half the season. So it's just them picking it up here. So what did you think of them making you wait to see Maul for the entire episode? Do you feel like there was enough going on that you didn't care that you were being stuck with a long wait?
Quite liked it. Again, in this context of, I had the task of the 3-episode arc, so I knew that Maul was going to show up at some point, but I liked that in this case, you have to wait for it, and it's following Savage on his search. They delay the gratification of encountering Maul. For me, I'd heard a little bit about in what kind of state he was going to find him. I like that it builds up to that. I quite like the snake creature that he encounters, and it's a strange journey, but these are quite short episodes, so it's not like they're stringing you along for too long. So you get a good opportunity for him to have a bit of an adventure or explore enough of the planet to have a few scrapes and then eventually encounter Maul.
Think of it from the marketing perspective of back in the day where they announced that Maul was coming back, and it's like, here's the episode where it happens, and then you don't get it until the last 2 minutes, and you have to wait a week to actually see him properly. Something that you would only know if you were there.
Yeah, in that context, it might be a bit different, whereas I was able to just let the next episode play and like, okay, now I want to see what happens. Yeah, maybe that would be a bit strange.
Andrew, what do you think? Do you think the episode holds itself together enough without seeing Maul until the bitter end?
Yeah, I do actually, and I think that that's part of what actually makes it a really, really good episode. Because the thing you have to remember is when Clone Wars was first airing, at this point, Darth Maul basically hadn't existed in the saga since Phantom Menace. And when we're thinking about this now, we're kind of adding on everything that we've seen with Maul since then. So it was interesting to look at it from the perspective of genuinely not knowing what we were going to find. And I think leaving the moment when Savage actually finds him to the end of the episode, it just really helps to heighten the anticipation. Obviously, yes, it was really irritating watching it first time and having to wait longer for what you're promised. But from a storytelling perspective, I think it was done brilliantly.
And it's interesting that the entire episode focuses on Savage as well. It's not from the perspective of any of our characters.
Exactly, because it's all about his journey.
Yeah. You get Anakin and Ahsoka where they try to go for lunch and then they happen to stumble into the one diner in the galaxy that he's just torn through. The Force points them in interesting directions, I suppose. You can hand wave a lot of that, can't you? Where it's the Force. The Force did it.
Yes, the Force is mysterious and unknowable, and we are but pawns in its bidding.
The Force wanted you to be there so that you can do nothing about it. And you get some cryptic stuff from Anakin where he says he feels something familiar, which I guess he's referring to Savage because I think he fought him in the episodes that he was in.
Yes, I think so.
And Ahsoka does nothing. But she's in her more grown-up clothes now, which is good. And she's clearly grown up a bit since the last saw her. Angus, what did you think of the brief showing of Ahsoka being a bit older and less annoying than I suppose she was in the movie?
I don't know if there's really enough there to have much of a reaction to. I think I remember talking about her being a bit whiny in the film, and that being my only experience with the character. I haven't seen the show, so don't know if I had much of a reaction. I really did just think of this as being Savage's episode, and yeah, I suppose you maybe need to check in with your heroes to see what they're up to and know that they're on the trail, and that's kind of setting up the confrontations and things. But yeah, to me it was pretty minor.
You had a random scene with Dooku and Grievous as well.
You did, yes. So minor that I almost forgot.
It's completely superfluous. It's just Dooku saying there's something weird going on out there. And you have Grievous hacking up a lung. Really agrees with them. Well, it's weird because they'd basically dropped Grievous by this point, hadn't they, Andrew? He's quite prominent in season 1 and he basically disappears.
I think it might have been largely because they just didn't really know what to do with him.
We've already broken canon because Obi-Wan acts like he meets him in Revenge of the Sith, but they've fought several times in this show.
Yeah, and I certainly, when watching it, I couldn't really reconcile how Grievous was a very skilled and powerful warrior, but at the same time also incredibly cowardly and ready to run at the first sign of things not going his way. I found it kind of irritating, and I just guess maybe other people felt the same and they decided to lessen his presence a bit.
Yeah, which is good, I think. Never liked the character anyway. He's another one in the stupid Star Wars naming convention, isn't he? General Evil, essentially. And Dooku, who never gets called Darth Tyrannus, but you could buy toys with that title on the box.
I suppose I just took the checking in with all of the different characters as being part of the style of the show. Again, unfamiliar with it, but my impression was that that's how the stories are told, where you have quite a vast universe of characters, so every now and again we show you what they're all up to.
It's actually uncommon in Clone Wars for them to check in like this with everybody, or a chunk of people. You have entire arcs where it's just Anakin or something, where it's just Jar Jar, and you don't see any other characters.
Okay.
The vastness of the universe is actually quite well represented throughout quite a lot of this show. You even have episodes where there's just loads of clones and none of the principal characters appear at all. So it is confusing that they had to give airtime to these characters that aren't really doing anything in the context of the story. The final scene with Yoda and Obi-Wan makes sense because Obi-Wan's going to have to go on the board next. Yoda just wandering around telling people that bad stuff's about to happen. That's what he does.
Well, that's what he's best at, being cryptic and mysterious.
Was it last year that we posited that he might just be an idiot and it's been very well covered up for a long time?
I'd forgotten that, actually. But yeah, I think it was.
Just sitting there in these chambers being like, bad stuff out there is about to happen. Yeah, there's a war on. Of course there is. Yeah, but specifically, something bad's about to happen. We also have a Jedi that's being groomed by the not yet Emperor, but let's not really focus on that too much. Angus, you mentioned the snake creature. I actually loved the junk planet that they were on. The one that's not Raxus Prime, which is the big Star Wars junk planet that's in other stuff. And you had the snake. I put a note saying, Twisted Garden of Eden. I don't agree with that as such, even though I've put that note. But it is part of the Star Wars tradition of silly animals wasting people's time. You said you liked the snake. What was it you liked about it?
It's a bit of a recurring character in different kids' properties where you've got a kind of snivelling character who is actually more scheming than they maybe at first seem, so they're covering up their deceitful ways. I was trying to work out what was going on with this character, because if he knew what was good for him, he would avoid a character like Savage. You see this guy stalking about your home and you think, no, I don't want any part of this. So obviously he's got ulterior motives. So it's quite cool how he insinuates himself into the story. It tries to help him out and then obviously tries to get some dinner out of it.
Yeah, with the big junk pile that tries to eat him and stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty good hellish atmosphere on the junk planet, I think. And that's kind of where I got the Garden of Eden thing from, but it's sort of an inverse of that. But also, in a way, he's a little bit like Yoda in Empire Strikes Back. He's just master of his little fiefdom, isn't he? And claiming to offer guidance for wayward travellers.
Yeah, and I suppose you never know what these kooky characters that you meet on these desolate planets are going to be like. Are they going to be your master, your trainer, or are they just going to be an idiot that leads you around in circles and you never get to what you're looking for?
Andrew, what do you think of the snake guy? I haven't even taken down his name.
Don't remember it, actually. I don't know if he even gave it. I did quite enjoy having him there. Because it was good having someone for Savage to have like actual conversation with, then immediately end in them dying. Which incidentally also a bit. I really enjoyed the interaction between Savage and the pilot whose ship he hijacks. You are going to take me off world or I will kill you. Yep, sure, maybe say chief. I ain't arguing with you.
He agrees so quickly. He's like, we're going here now. And he's like, yep, all right you are.
Yeah, just building on what Angus was saying about seeing Savage and being exactly the kind of person you would avoid if they randomly rock up. I think Snake Creature might have seen someone that looks like him and then decided that he looked like somebody that he could manipulate, and in the end overestimates how much he's actually able to manipulate him.
Yeah, I think Savage is too dumb to be manipulated in some ways, isn't he? He doesn't really want anything. He just gets told what to do. He doesn't have a lot of autonomy, this old Savage. Speaking of side characters that made an impression despite a very brief appearance, I loved the droid with the calling the police subroutine, with the eyes lighting up.
I forgot that little bit, but yes, it is a lovely touch.
Do you think that diner is part of Dexter Jettster's franchise?
I'd like to think so.
I don't think you see Dexter in the Clone Wars show, which is a shame because that character has lived on in people's imaginations ever since, I guess. It's weird that he isn't returned, but actually it's probably one of the best scenes in that movie. This crazy 50s diner with this many-armed alien.
I would have assumed that Dexter Jettster would have been in the Clone Wars. I kind of can't believe that if you have a whole galaxy of characters and you manage to make it to diners and things, that he just never shows his face again.
He maybe does, and I'm forgetting, but I feel like that's also something I wouldn't forget. Andrew, can you remember, does Dexter show up in the Clone Wars?
Yeah, I was just trying to think. Not any specific instance I can recall.
It seems like it'd be a no-brainer. Obi-Wan goes to this guy whenever he needs to find something out that's not in the Jedi archives.
It's the way they make it seem in the film. You could imagine him always giving tips or him returning back there for a bit of information.
Yeah, someone was having a blue milkshake and said this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like that little droid that could call the police and very little else. And also the guy that tried to threaten Anakin with a frying pan. That was some boldness. But we do eventually get to Maul, and we see a brief appearance from him. He's broken, demented. He has spider legs. Andrew, do you think this makes him sympathetic at first? Do you think you can extrapolate anything from his brief appearance in Phantom Menace? Was this a good introduction or reintroduction?
It was a good introduction in terms of establishing exactly what he has become. Though in terms of sympathy, he doesn't really have enough actual genuine personality to have elicited sympathy at that point, looking at it from the perspective of not having seen anything after this. Darth Maul is essentially the Boba Fett of the prequel series. In that he's not an actual character, he's just a plot device who the fandom decided that they absolutely loved, and as a result was given far greater prominence in subsequent installments. Though I think as an introduction of a character who could actually be interesting to follow, I think is a very, very good one. Well, because obviously the first thing you'll know is how he actually survived. And you know, one of this was by effectively transforming himself into a detritus cyborg, and you can really see why he was actually perceived as an actual monster by weird creatures that live on this purgatorial planet.
My question was less around how he survived, because he got cut in half. We have people that have been cut in half that survive now, so that's not necessarily a miracle in itself. But how did he get there? That's not explained. Did he drag himself using his hands and stow away on a ship?
There was also the 1,000-foot drop or so, because for some reason Coruscant architecture doesn't allow railings.
It was Naboo.
Naboo, damn it.
But yes, there's no railings. He just fell down a big pit. No one knows what happened to him. If the Emperor can survive that plus
somehow
exploding, then fair enough. Maul didn't explode, so he just landed. I'm assuming there was some kind of air cushion on his way down, and he landed softly.
Pile of old mattresses.
Yeah, and then someone perhaps dragged him onto a ship, or he dragged himself. It's a question that's never answered. Angus, what did you think of the reintroduction of Maul?
I tend to agree with Andrew on that. There's barely enough character in The Phantom Menace to set up a character for him to then carry on as here. In fact, this could be a completely different character because we learn so little about him in the film. And I think that the best version of Darth Maul probably exists somewhere between the Phantom Menace trailer where you see him ignite his lightsaber and maybe the first time that you see the film and you're still convincing yourself that this was amazing because it was Star Wars and
it had to be.
Guys were flipping around.
The fact that I was bored, I'm the problem. The film's not the problem. I must be the problem.
Exactly. So I think that's a sweet spot for Maul. And then obviously there's a troubled history, or maybe like we were saying, Boba Fett, people make more of it than what was actually on screen. I've heard a lot about the reintroduction of the character. I'd heard a lot about the spider legs. I definitely was not expecting an entire spider body as well. I was quite surprised by that. I was thinking, okay, spider legs, he's going to come back. He's going to maybe have 4 legs, maybe 6, maybe 8 at a push. But he had the whole, I don't know what you'd call it, the abdomen, the thorax. I don't know what part of a spider that is. But it was all there. So that was crazy. And again, I had those questions of how did this come to be? How did he get here? How did he survive? Everything we've just been asking. But that aside, I really did like how he was broken and deranged. Again, I had no expectation or anticipation of what he was going to be like when he was reintroduced. And I thought it was quite an interesting choice to make him the way he was and quite upset and shying away into the shadows. And I'm a bit disappointed that that version of him didn't last longer because you encounter him like that in this episode and you think, oh, that's quite an interesting direction for what was a menacing character before, and then it all flips quite quickly in the next episode. So I did feel kind of sympathetic for him, but not in a sympathy for the Maul that we knew and thought we loved from Phantom Menace, and then this being a continuation of that, if you know what I mean.
Well, that was my thought as well. I would have quite liked a whole episode of trying to make him come to his senses enough to leave. Mm-hmm. Because it all happens so quickly, like you say, and they're wasting a bit of potential there. And yeah, to your point about it could be a different character, I guess that's the appeal. Maul is basically a blank slate, isn't he? You know nothing about him. You just know that he was Palpatine's apprentice, he looks cool, and he had a double-bladed lightsaber, and is obviously a challenge to fight, but that's it. That's all you have. So you can bring back this character that people think they like, because he looks cool and has a double-bladed lightsaber. And then you can do whatever the hell you want with him, because no one knows anything. And I actually did look into this a little bit. Apparently there was comic books before this that were then decanonized by this, because Star Wars and Star Trek had a similar, in some ways, canon principle in terms of once it's on screen, it's canon. So therefore, anything that may contradict that was produced before is then rendered moot, which happened here. But apparently the spider legs and stuff was part of a comic book that came out at some point before this. And I guess Dave Filoni repurposed it. He used to be good at that before he is, well, what he is now. But he used to be really good at picking parts from other media and canonizing them properly. He did that a lot in Rebels, and that was after Disney binned the entire expanded universe and branded it Legends. But he was picking and choosing little bits and pieces to bring back into it, stuff like Admiral Thrawn and so on. So I feel like this is maybe not his first foray into this. He's probably done it before in Clone Wars, but it's definitely a prominent one.
That must have been quite a cool sandbox to play in, because if you've got all these stories that are known to a greater or lesser extent, and in some ways loved to a greater or lesser extent, to be able to kind of pick and choose some of these that have real merit to bring back into canon.
Yeah, I didn't find Maul sympathetic here particularly, but I did find it interesting, and I thought Sam Witwer hit the ground running with a great vocal performance.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, it was spectacular. I think Maul's popularity now, as a result of this, is very largely due to Sam Witwer's performance.
Yeah, it was Peter Serafinowicz in The Phantom Menace, wasn't it, for his 2 lines?
It was, yes, which is also randomly referenced in an episode of Spaced.
Oh, okay. And Ray Park was the body, of course.
Yes, and all the martial art artistry.
Yes. Sam Witwer made a lot of waves in the Star Wars universe, actually. Before this, he was the voice and the visual for Starkiller in the Force Unleashed games, and he was great at that. Starkiller is a character that should have been recanonized in some way, especially, this is going way off base, but imagine Ahsoka had been about Ahsoka encountering Vader's other secret apprentice.
Double secret apprentice.
Well, I don't think Ahsoka was ever a secret. It was just, I think people were watching Clone Wars wondering if she was going to die this week. Because she's not in Revenge of the Sith, so we need to explain that at some point. And then the first time the show got cancelled, they didn't really explain why she's not there, but then they do in Rebels to some degree, and then eventually you see the circle being complete when they finally finish Clone Wars.
Didn't the first run of Clone Wars end with Ahsoka leaving the Jedi?
Yeah, but that doesn't explain why she's not around as such.
Not specifically, but it can justify her still being alive.
It explained why she wasn't around for Order 66, or so you thought. Until you saw the actual last episode of Clone Wars.
Okay, that's kind of intense.
Turns out she was around for Order 66 and stuff happened. But anyway, way off base. Sam Witwer was also the voice of one of the pillars of the Force, or whatever it was. This physical manifestation of the dark side he was, wasn't he?
He was, yes. It was the Sun, wasn't he?
Yes. So, yeah, he's quite prominent in Star Wars. And he's also now kind of played Captain Kirk.
In what way?
There was the... God, this is way tangenty now. We're into Star Trek now. People are going to have our heads for this. I forget what it's called. But there's a short that was made recently where they used AI techniques and creative filming and makeup and so on to essentially have Kirk's journey into the afterlife after he dies. And Sam Witwer is the body of Kirk. He plays Kirk in that thing.
Oh, okay.
It'll be linked in the show notes because now I've talked about it. It's really cool. You can't tell it's him. He's a stand-in for William Shatner, effectively, because I think they have similar shaped faces. I think that's why it is. But yeah, Sam Witwer's really cool. He streams on Twitch every now and again, and he's always interesting. He also hilariously calls out when Star Wars is bad. There was that viral tweet he did that was a massive takedown of The Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, God, yes.
The Star Wars account posted, the crew of the Star Destroyers, or whatever. Did you know the crew of the Star Destroyers are this? And he replies with, no, how could we have known?
Exactly. Everything about that is just, oh, God, I hate that film. So much.
But curiously, Disney still employed him after he did that, so he must know where the bodies are buried. Or some of them, anyway. And it's not him. He's not the body that they're burying, so good for him. Anyway, Sam Witwer playing Maul. Fantastic. He was doing the rounds in sci-fi at this time, wasn't he? Around about this time, you had Smallville and Battlestar Galactica. They're years around this time, but around this time, he was doing the rounds of these various things.
Yeah, and it was also in the American remake of Being Human.
Yes. Something I haven't seen, but yes.
He was the vampire character in that.
Yeah, Maul, voiced by Sam Witwer, bit deranged, but out of sorts. So shall we move on to Revenge, or does anyone have any last things to say about Brothers?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good to move on.
Talk about Revenge then, and Angus, as you alluded to, you get a little bit of Maul's restoration, but it takes a couple of minutes because this is a cartoon. But yeah, I do think that this could have been an entire episode, or a combination of the end of the previous episode and the beginning of this one. You could have easily stretched it out to a full episode, because there was plenty there of just Maul being this lost soul and having to be restored in some way. But it's just, he gets taken to the Night Sisters planet, and then they identify that he's lost his mind. They cast a spell, his horns shrink, his legs turn into less spidery legs, and he's fine. He's a bit angry and vengeful, but he's fine. He at least knows who he is.
Yeah, it's quite a quick restoration, and as we said before about the last episode, I probably could have done with a bit more of the deranged version of him, because I found that quite interesting. It was quite cool to see Dathomir and the magic, that kind of stuff. Again, I'm picking up from context clues that there's a bit more of that in the Clone Wars. I'm only really familiar with it from Fallen Order, so I was kind of joining those dots there. I quite like how he gets his, what I'm calling Maljo back. But yeah, it's a bit too quick for me, and maybe this sort of thing happens quite often in Star Wars when people are dismembered or they have catastrophic injuries and then they're restored quite quickly, so maybe it's just on brand for them that it's never that bad. Don't worry, we can fix you.
Because magic.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Anakin was burned alive in a volcano and there was no magic that restored him. We didn't get restored at all, but he was augmented, I suppose is the word you would use.
Also, Maul being restored so quickly is actually quite a good example of how the pace of the storytelling in the Clone Wars episodes is very, very swift. There are so many of them that have brief ideas and moments that could have been spun out so much longer, but it just blasts through to the next thing. Which I think partly might have been a cynical decision of assuming that kids would have no attention span. But it also kind of demonstrates the frantic pace that fighting a war on this kind of scale would have actually been like. Constant developments and everyone having to constantly adapt to them before the next danger arises. It is sometimes slightly detrimental to exploring quite interesting pieces of lore, but it also does make watching the show itself quite exciting.
I did actually find his depressed state to be genuinely scary. I thought it was quite a scary representation of it and the dark nature of the scene and everything. So maybe it is quite good just to move things along speedily, George Lucas style, faster and more intense, just to get back to the actions. And if I'd had things my way, maybe I'd be complaining about them spending too much time with this broken character. I always like to have things both ways. But yeah, I can see the point of moving things on and getting on with the story.
It's weird how that sensibility wasn't all-encompassing, though, in this show. For example, you had an episode where you spent a good 12 or so minutes with a clone that was a deserter and had a family and stuff. It was this really engaging, character-driven thing where it took its time to tell that story, but then you have something like this where it's, okay, we found him, he has spider legs, he's depressed, now we're going to fix him and now he's going to go and fight Obi-Wan. It just seems weird that sometimes they trust the audience to engage in a good story and sometimes they don't. And maybe it just depends on the mentality of the time, because this is a season finale, isn't it? So it's got to be pretty high octane. But I'm pretty sure if I went through season 4, there's at least an episode that could have been ditched in favour of a rehabilitating Maul episode.
Yeah, and I think that the whole Maul returns with spider legs thing, again, this is entirely in my own mind where I built this up to, is then going to be running around fighting with these spider legs. It's actually just quite a short part. I wonder how much on-screen time he actually spends with those spider legs and then straight back to being a biped again.
I just wonder whether there might have been an original plan to have more of him with spider legs, but then they decided it was too complicated to animate and just gave him 2 legs again as quickly as possible.
Maybe. Anything could have happened. We'll just never know, because Dave Filoni will never appear on this podcast to tell me. Maybe he will. Never say never. One thing I did find really interesting was the way that he expressed how much the universe and galaxies moved on without him. Savage tells him the Clone Wars has started, and he says, I was supposed to be involved in that. Now I'm not. It's just the idea that he's been cast aside and abandoned and forgotten. I guess Palpatine maybe thought he was dead and didn't come looking for him. Or maybe Maul was a means to an end for Palpatine. We have no idea what their relationship is like. Perhaps in future episodes of this podcast we might explore some of that. Who knows? But for the purposes of this episode, you only get Maul's regretful few lines about, I was supposed to be involved in this and now I'm here doing this, so that's not great for me, I guess. The idea of all that lost time that he's had and how he once felt like he was part of something and now he's not. It's compelling and it's a good place to start.
It's an interesting idea to explore and maybe extrapolate. Again, as you said, he's kind of a blank canvas, so you can take, he was at Palpatine's side, he falls from that position, and then we've got almost endless possibilities of what we could imply his motivations were when he was at that position. So maybe if you're a Sith apprentice, you have to assume that at some point you're going to murder your master and you're going to take over. So maybe that was what he always intended to do and feels kind of robbed of that opportunity.
Yeah, and instead he gets cut in half by a Padawan that's not even ready to face the trials.
Yeah, not a good look.
He did kill Qui-Gon, though.
Yeah, took one down.
It's also possible that even if Palpatine thought Maul survived, he might have ditched him anyway, because if he were taken down by a mere Padawan, then what use is he to me?
Surprised that Palpatine didn't try to get Obi-Wan on side as his new apprentice, because Obi-Wan gave in to his anger in that moment, didn't he, when he fought Maul?
That's a good point, actually.
Not something that's ever brought up again. That time Obi-Wan got really angry and killed, or thought he killed, Sith.
Yeah, Palpatine should be looking out for that sort of thing and being like, oh, apprentice tryouts, this guy's showing some promise.
Okay, let's let me bring up the notebook.
Yeah, but they've also found this kid who's really powerful.
He'll be watching his career.
Yeah, I'm watching his career with great interest. I can't possibly watch another career. Plus, I'm going to recruit Dooku somehow. That's something that happens.
Got a lot of plates to spin.
He does. Plus, he's got to focus on taking over the Senate. He's a busy guy, is old Palpatine. Old Sheev. I still can't believe that's his name. Sheev Palpatine.
It's short for Sheevan.
Is it really?
No, I just like that it rhymes with Steve.
Yeah.
I think it'd be even funnier if he was Steve Palpatine.
I feel like that's a piece of information that he had stricken from public record as soon as he became Emperor. My first name is Emperor. That's it. There's no Sheev Palpatine. Also, the notion of Maul just stewing in his revenge all this time. He didn't know who he was, or where he was, or what was going on, but there was just this inkling in the back of his mind that he needed to get revenge on Obi-Wan for chopping him in half. It's knocking on, what, 12, 13, 14 years at this point? Something like that, since The Phantom Menace. So that's a long time to stew, isn't it? Especially for someone that's tuned to the dark side. That can only mess with you in really, well, for us, dramatically interesting ways. For him, really mentally damaging ways.
It also highlights just how in tune with the dark side he is, with the Sith being about hate. And his hate was what basically sustained him. But after the loss of half his body and the deterioration of his mind, all he has to live for, to focus on, is just this focal point of hatred.
And the loss of purpose as well, of course. He does actually say he used to be at the side of the most powerful being in the galaxy.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting moment, because that was the first inkling of him becoming an actual character, giving him some genuine personality.
Yes, the heir to the Empire.
Yeah, of course he never would have been. I don't think old Sheev would have stuck with him for that long. You just don't know. It'd be interesting what if to explore, wouldn't it? What if Maul had won or made it away or whatever. I know that there's a lot of people that like to think about rewriting the prequels that always said that Maul should have been a recurring menace throughout all three of them. And I don't disagree with that. They could have even had the robot legs after he gets cut in half as a mirror for Vader and all this. There's a million YouTubers that have come up with some similar stuff to this, but...
Made him into a sort of Captain Phasma type.
Yes, Captain Phasma, that well-developed character who has chrome armour and other stormtroopers don't. And other such pointless Star Wars characters that everyone loves.
I like the stormtrooper shouting traitor.
Yes, he's better than Captain Phasma. He actually does something. Very briefly, but he does something. So yeah, revenge is all Maul has left. He's been thinking of nothing but Obi-Wan for the last however many years it is. One question that I did think about when rewatching the episodes as well is, what do we think of the fact that he loses his double lightsaber? That thing that defined him in our minds and hearts for so long. Angus, do you think that Maul can cut it with a single-bladed lightsaber? Do you feel like it's a betrayal of the quote-unquote character?
It's a symbol of everything that he's lost.
Even though Savage has one and he could just have that instead.
I know, it's a shame that Savage has one. That kind of rubs it in even more, I think. That's my thing. I think he should have had a double-bladed lightsaber.
Yeah, although I think it's a symbol of them taking the character and making it their own for the show as well, giving him a single blade because he has personality now and doesn't need a double blade to be cool.
But again, having it both ways by having Savage have one.
I also think it's an extension of the point that he has effectively lost everything that made him who he was.
Or lost half of himself as well.
Exactly. And because him wielding the double-bladed saber is so firmly entrenched in people's minds with the character, then to lose that, it's also losing part of who he was.
He gets it back in Rebels, doesn't he? Or he has a double-bladed saber in Rebels at some point.
I think so. In Twilight the Apprentice. Pretty sure he had one there.
Yeah, it was hidden in his walking stick or something. Or it was his walking stick, I'm not sure. Been a while. But it's a brave choice, I think, because that's what all the people that remember him from Phantom Menace will know about him. And now he has a single blade.
We're all here for the double-bladed lightsaber.
Oh, he has a double blade in Solo, doesn't he? In his cameo.
I honestly don't remember. Also don't remember much else about that thing either, to be honest.
Nah, I've only seen it twice. once to watch it and then once for this podcast and then never again because it's just not that interesting. He wastes no time in going after Obi-Wan, and the best way to flush out a Jedi is to go and mercilessly attack innocents. So it's good to see that old Sith attitude hasn't left him. Don't care about innocents. We're just going to murder a bunch of people, and hopefully Obi-Wan will come across. Hopefully they don't send another Jedi that won't be emotionally compromised by fighting this guy, but that wouldn't be that interesting, would it? There's one thing about the fighting innocents that I did note that I found interesting. They talk about Savage Opress was once kind-hearted before being corrupted. And like I say, I can't remember if in the original arc they covered that to any degree, but there's something about the insidiousness of the Night Sisters where they rip out any goodness in someone and replace it with hate and anger and so on. And I do wonder if that's what happened to Maul in the first place. Do you think Palpatine just goes to the Night Sisters when he needs a new apprentice? It's the shop that he goes to get apprentices.
Well, it would certainly be an efficient way of doing it.
Apprentices are us, is how he treats them.
Zabrak's on demand.
I want Darth Maul again, but bigger.
And not as red.
And not as red. More orange. Bigger, more orange. A lot dumber as well. That'd be great. Well, I think Savage Opress would be more likely to kill Palpatine than Maul would. There'd just be something about the brutality of the way that he would go about it. Problem is, he wouldn't know what to do after he killed him. He's a dog chasing cars, isn't he? He wouldn't know what to do if he caught him. So, Angus, what do you think of the plan to draw Obi-Wan out by killing innocents, just going and massacring people?
Yeah, that's pretty dark. You get quite a lot more of it than I was expecting as well.
Clone Wars can be a bit brutal sometimes, actually. In the same way that Star Wars can sometimes be a bit brutal.
I was surprised by that. I was definitely expecting this to pitch younger than what I got.
I feel like Clone Wars as a show grew up with its audience a bit, so they were expecting its first run of audience to be like 8 years old when it started, and then by the time you get to here, they're like 12. So probably able to take a bit more darkness.
Prepared for this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's my impression, because you see it's quite, well, not light-hearted, but more light in its first couple of seasons than it ultimately becomes. It gets a lot darker as it goes on. It's almost like the Harry Potter arc, actually. Not to go too far into the mechanics of how problematic that situation is, but the books did grow up at pace with the characters. You can almost see that it was written for the age of the characters when the first book came out, and then as the subsequent books come out, you expect them to be a bit older and then therefore able to handle more. And I feel like Clone Wars is a similar arc, as in, well, you noticed last year that the film feels like it skews quite young, and then the first couple of seasons are like that. So by the time you get here, it's a lot darker. And I think maybe Dave Filoni dialed into the fact that a lot of Star Wars fans wanted a bit more meat from it as well. This is why you get stuff like this.
And was this the point where the Jedi are reacting to the plan and decide that Obi-Wan should go by himself?
Yeah. Seems like a good idea.
This is obviously a ploy to lure you out, so we should play along with it.
Yeah, off you go.
Yeah, they'll never expect it.
Let's not send Plo Koon or something, who doesn't know this guy at all. Send you Obi-Wan. Dramatically convenient for you to be involved in this. But it is funny, the contrast where the obsession on Maul's part and Obi-Wan's like, oh yeah, that guy that I fought once 12 years ago and haven't thought about since.
A Mr. Burns and Homer dynamic.
Well, you have Obi-Wan messing with him at that point. He's like, oh, I don't remember who you are. Of course he does, because you wouldn't forget the guy that killed your master, I suppose. But Obi-Wan's fought a lot of people since then. I think he's even fought people that have killed people that he cares about as well. So Maul was a long time ago.
Almost certainly.
Well, that happens in the next episode.
What I was also surprised by is that typically in shows like this, when you have a villain plan of drawing out the heroes by threatening innocent people, it usually ends up with it just being that. So innocent people are threatened with death unless the hero comes out and faces them, and then they're ultimately saved. But in this case, Maul and Savage are just flat out indiscriminately murdering people. It is just really not the direction I was expecting it to go, and actually a bit more of a shock as a result.
Yeah, but it isn't uncommon for this era of the animation. And thinking ahead to Rebels as well, you have the episode where Vader first comes on the scene, and there's the Tarkin town on the planet that they're on, where people hide sometimes, and Vader's order is just burn it to the ground, then they can't hide there anymore. And it's just so merciless and indiscriminate, and this is a lot more brutally merciless because you see it unfold. But you have to commend them for the fact that Maul isn't one of these toothless villains that says he's going to do terrible things and then doesn't. He just does them without thinking about it, and there's nothing holding him back. He has no conscience whatsoever. There's going to be no redeeming this guy.
Yeah, and honestly, that's part of what makes him so interesting and also so scary.
Yeah, and there's even a hint of an abusive connection between him and Savage as well.
There is.
With Maul as the abuser.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good guy, not a great dude. It's Maul.
No chill.
No chill whatsoever. So what do we think of the Obi-Wan and Maul confrontation, this long-awaited rematch that we didn't know that we wanted, but we're getting it? Do you think it was meaningful, or do you think it was more like Obi-Wan? Oh yeah, this guy. Angus, what's your thoughts?
I didn't get a whole lot of it. Maybe that's because I'm coming from their last encounter being, in my mind, being the Phantom Menace, and then I'm diving into this thinking, okay, now Obi-Wan's going to be able to redress the balance. But as you've said, he's fought a lot of people along the way that I am not aware of. So I've not encountered all of this and the history that he has, and he's had his mind on other things. So his revenge or his grief at the loss of Qui-Gon is kind of frozen in time for me. And I didn't feel like that was fully embodied here, but maybe that's just because of everything I've just said. There's plenty of other reasons why he would address it in this way.
Yeah, I found it weird that they didn't really capitalize on the "you killed my master" and "I've never really reckoned with that," or "I'm a Jedi and I'm not allowed to reckon with that. I'm not allowed to let my emotions cloud my judgment," but they're going to cloud them here. It's just Obi-Wan fights him and he doesn't seem to be that bothered about it.
Yeah.
Just kind of unfinished business for him, isn't it?
That's what I was getting as well, yeah.
Andrew, what do you think?
It definitely wasn't the climactic confrontation, the big rematch that it was built up to be. But I think that was also never the intention anyway. Because this is only ever going to be the first encounter of an ongoing feud that can only end with one of them dying. So I don't think the writers bothered putting that much emotional intensity into it, because all of that would be needed to pay off later.
I think they could have put some in, though. I feel like not doing any was a bit of a strange choice.
Yeah, it would have been more meaningful if they'd made that connection to begin with.
Some kind of we meet again scene.
Yeah, instead you have Obi-Wan sassing him. I don't even remember you. Of all things, I was reminded of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where you had this villain telling Coulson his painful origin story that Coulson was responsible for, and Coulson was just like, I have no idea who you are. I deal with people like you once a week. Cool origin story, bro, but I don't remember you. Sorry. Which I think was a great approach in that instance, but here it just feels like it was completely sidelined. And another thing that they seem to forget about is there's a possible connection there between Ventress and Maul, as in they're both discarded apprentices trying to figure out what their place in the galaxy is. Ventress seems to have gone down the bounty hunting route. Is it working for her? We don't know. It's something that she's doing anyway. But she takes the bounty to go and kill Savage and Maul and teams up with Obi-Wan, which I thought was a cool team up. Seeing Obi-Wan with a red lightsaber was quite an interesting little novelty.
I've always thought that Ventress is a really interesting character. Whenever she appeared in an episode, I usually knew I was going to enjoy it. I don't recall that particular connection ever being explored in any way.
No.
Which I think is a shame, because it would give another facet to the motivations of the characters, and so it allows some greater understanding of what's actually driving them and the mindsets that they're forcing themselves into just to survive in this galaxy that had a high place for them but now just left them behind.
Yeah, Ventress is a weird one anyway, because she's not supposed to exist, because she's the third Sith, isn't she? And that's not supposed to be a thing.
I think they got around that by saying that she was a Dark Jedi.
Okay.
And so technically the Sith could have any number of Dark Jedi at their command.
It's like Vader and his Inquisitors.
Exactly, yes.
It's all about the technicalities.
Keep them in the reserves.
Got to match it up on the paperwork, otherwise it doesn't work. Has Ventress ever been resolved? Because I know she isn't in this in Rebels, so I don't know if she's appeared since in something else.
I think she ultimately dies in a novel in the pursuit of killing Count Dooku. But I remember that there was something that caused that to be decanonised, and I don't recall any specific details. That's really annoying.
So she doesn't appear in Bad Batch or anything?
No. Does she? Wait.
We're great at this.
Oh, for God's sake.
I have no idea, just to put that out there.
Actually, wasn't there an episode where she does appear in Bad Batch?
Well, I don't know, I haven't seen Bad Batch, so...
All right. I think she actually did at one point. I really need to rewatch Bad Batch, because most of the time when I watched it, I was tripping on painkillers, so I actually don't remember a lot of it.
Yeah, we're really good at this.
Yeah, absolute lore masters here.
Here's me reading Wikipedia verbatim and I don't know this stuff. But she's in this, definitely. And she's giving bounty hunting a go and she teams up with Obi-Wan. I think her team up with Obi-Wan's quite fun. I like their banter. I think this version of Obi-Wan is actually very funny.
Yeah, it's always great having a dynamic between two characters who hate each other, because they are completely honest. There's nothing they need to hide, because they have no reason to care what the other one thinks about them.
Yeah, and they both have a common goal, so for now we won't kill each other.
Yeah, not until we've killed the one we both want to kill.
Yeah, the best chance of us making it out alive is to work together, so we'll do that for now. Angus, what do you think of Obi-Wan as he's portrayed in these episodes after being lukewarm on him in the previous appearance? Do you agree that he's quite funny, quite sassy?
I don't feel like he's exactly the same sort of character. Maybe he's the same as he is in the Zero the Hutt movie. I tend to think that the Clone Wars version of him, as much as I have been exposed to him, doesn't feel quite like my Obi-Wan, but then there's going to be hundreds of episodes of this that are evidence to the contrary, so it's almost not even worth making that argument.
Whereas the only thing you can go on after this point is Revenge of the Sith and him just being a lying scumbag in the original trilogy.
Yeah, that's the guy I like to spend time with.
Were you hoping that his dynamic with Anakin is he just never honest with him, just lies to him constantly about everything?
Well, maybe the lies are about how much of a good friend he was to him and all this kind of stuff where you're like, we never actually see that in the prequels.
We do see it in the Clone Wars, though. Not in these episodes, though. They don't interact in these episodes at all. And I can't remember if we ever get the Anakin versus Maul fight that we all maybe wanted to see. I imagine we must do at a later point. I can't remember. Anakin versus Maul. Does anyone care about that? Probably.
Some people must.
Some people must care about it, yeah. Anything else on Revenge? I feel like it's quite a slight episode. We've talked a lot about, or a little about, the rehabilitation of Maul, and the fights are the fights. I think the setting of the fight is actually quite dull. Just a cargo bay and a ship. Just this underlit brown room.
It did feel a bit like when a show is running low on budget and they're like, right, we're just going to have to use the boiler room. But when it's an animation, you think you could do anything.
Well, animation also has a budget, remember.
There's probably sets that you can just reuse from that as well, so...
Assets, yeah.
Maybe they did.
It's funny how people have that perspective of animation. Yeah, it's free. No, there's rendering times and all that.
I wasn't alluding to that. I just mean, you'd think it'd be slightly easier to spin up an interesting background compared to scouting a location or whatever. But maybe I'm just being ignorant of all of the effort that goes into animation. I'm sorry, animators. I'm sorry.
You work really hard on this underlit brown room.
You brought it up.
Andrew, anything else on Revenge, or shall we move on?
No, I think let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Okay, so let's move on to our final episode, first episode of Season 5, Revival. The narration tells us, incidentally, I'm just going to say, I love the Clone Wars opening with the war serial narration. I think that's perfect.
Breaking news, just in, over the wire.
Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. No notes. It tells us that Maul and Savage Opress have been busy. They have had episodes that we will never see where they're doing stuff, and Maul's decided to pivot to being a crime lord, which is something that Solo will pick up some years from the airing of this episode. That is one question, actually, Angus. I'm sure we discussed it when we discussed Solo at the time, but how confused were you by Maul's cameo in Solo?
Quite, and I was maybe going to bring that up at the end of this discussion, because it seems like it should follow on naturally that we would then pick up there and say this is what eventually became of the character and then was very quickly nixed. I don't think I was confused. I think some people would probably be more confused and think, who is this supposed to be? This strange cameo that just appears out of the darkness.
Or if your only experience of Star Wars was the movies, wasn't he cut in half and killed?
Yeah, I'd heard enough of the rumours. I probably expected him to still be sitting on some spider legs at that point, as we've discussed. So I knew he was still out there, but yeah, it's a weird one. And obviously things transpired the way they did, and we never got to find out what he was all about.
Yeah, well, you see him in Rebels, and it's after Solo, obviously, so his criminal empire has faded. But this is the beginnings of that. This is him deciding, I'm not a Sith anymore, I'm going to be a crime lord, and apparently there are no other crime lords in my way. Oh no, there are. I need to get around them. I had two thoughts about this that we could discuss. Is his decision to be a crime lord an indication that he wants to leave his old life behind, or is he overcompensating for his bitterness? Andrew, we'll start with you. Which do you think it is? Do you think he's not really wanting to do this? He just wants to do something?
Basically, I think he's doing this probably because it's the most violent thing he could think of to do at the time, because he has a lot of unresolved rage and anger, and so turned to a profession that would frequently allow him to express violence and anger.
Yeah, and plus it's the idea that he wanted to be part of the power in the galaxy, and that was taken from him, so this is one way for him to claim some power in the galaxy.
Yes, so he can feel like he has a presence.
Yeah.
He's a known figure. He's someone of note.
Yeah, he just didn't anticipate that there's already a criminal element that quite like the position they're in and don't want some weird red guy with horns horning in on their territory. Angus, what do you think of Maul's decision to do this? How do you feel it's motivated?
I saw it as a bit of a means to an end. If you're a powerful, violent type and you want to exact your will over people and possibly take revenge against those who you're bitter at, then that's probably quite a good profession to go into. It's going to give you a lot of opportunity to be around other violent people and dominate them or turn them to your will, and probably lay his hands on some money and some resources that will help him in his quest. I wasn't really thinking about this in the longer term of him becoming a crime lord or a crime boss or anything. anything, but yeah, it was more about what actions would he have to take to get him to his ultimate goal.
Yeah, it's reasonable. And you have the continued dynamic of Maul and Savage. Talked about the abusive relationship. You definitely see that here. And Maul is still following the Sith code. He's installed himself as the master, and Savage obviously being the apprentice. One note that I put was, when he saves Savage, is that twisted compassion, or do you think it's another means to an end?
I think it might be both, actually.
Both. Interesting.
It's possible you can recognise how much of a kindred spirit he has in Savage, while at the same time constantly remaining aware of how much use he is to him.
Yeah, I was thinking of him retaining him as an asset.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have many options, does he?
Mm-hmm.
It's either this guy or no one.
Yeah.
But I'm sure the Night Sisters could corrupt someone else for him.
Yeah, but aren't they all dead by this point?
No, because it was only one episode ago that they were still here.
Star Wars chronology confuses me a lot.
Yeah, I don't think they were dead by this point. I'm pretty sure the Emperor only kills them after the Empire begins.
Okay.
But anyway, interesting that it could be both. There's a little glimmer of compassion there, but also it's more that he needs muscle, and he doesn't really have any. And his plan to take over the criminal underworld goes spectacularly wrong here. And Hondo is a character that appears quite a lot of places. He's in Rebels as well. Is it Mandalorian he also appears in at some point?
I think so.
He's definitely appeared in live action, whichever show it was. But I like that he's not impressed or afraid of Maul at all. He just doesn't care. It proves that the Sith power just isn't enough by itself to be feared or respected. So I thought Hondo was a great foil for him, actually.
Yeah, I love Hondo as a character. He's one of my favourites. It's because it's almost like he can see any kind of situation as part of some cosmic joke he's trying to figure out. He just always seems to have this jovial attitude to any kind of encounter that he finds himself in, no matter who he's dealing with or how dangerous they are. And also, just as a random aside, the voice that Jim Cummings uses for him is also the same one that he uses for Minsk in the first Baldur's Gate game from the late 90s.
That's cool.
It's actually a voice I've seen a few times, actually. There was also an episode of Gargoyles that he was in where he uses that voice as well. Though it was one of the crappy Season 3 ones, so I don't remember specifics.
Are you saying that Jim Cummings is lazy and just recycles voices and hopes we won't notice?
I'm saying that every human being alive has a limit to the different ways in which they can manipulate their vocal cords.
Yeah, Sam Witwer can sound like Sam Witwer or Darth Maul. That's his only two. Mm-hmm. Angus, what do you think of Hondo? Did you think he was good here?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him here or anywhere else, really. I thought that, yeah, he put up a good fight against Maul and Savage, which is probably more than I was expecting. And he seemed able to turn the mutineers back to his cause quite quickly as well. So he obviously has some power to wield.
Yeah, he appears quite a lot in Clone Wars, and he appears a lot in Rebels as well. He's always a good time. He's an engaging character. I actually feel like he's what Boba Fett should be, really, in a lot of ways. Just someone who knows his craft very well, knows his way around the territory really well. I don't know what's done with Boba Fett, either non-canon or in canon, because I gave up on the Book of Boba Fett after 2 episodes, and haven't really indulged in much of the now Legends continuity where he does stuff. But based on what people would tell me about Boba Fett, I feel like Hondo just does that. He's just out there doing his crime thing, being a bounty hunter, all that stuff. Andrew, based on your knowledge of Boba Fett, do you think Hondo is a better Boba than Boba?
He's really good in that he just always seems to be everywhere at the right time for anyone who needs to deal with him. And as Angus just mentioned, his capacity for manipulating people is incredible, just with how easily he's able to talk the mutineers around. And when it's revealed to Maul that was what he'd done, he's so nonchalant about it. It's like, yeah, well, you might have briefly tempted them, but I got them back on my side again because that's what I do. What do you think was going to happen? Seriously.
And it lets Maul see what real power is in some ways as well.
Exactly, because power lies beyond just physical strength and fighting ability. That's definitely something that Maul needed to learn, and may have actually at least partially influenced his subsequent actions, like when he effectively takes over Mandalore.
I actually liked that this episode was a spectacular failure from Maul and Savage, because it's the push and pull of seeing villains defeated and victorious in peaks and troughs. So Maul, you could argue that his previous appearance was basically a victory, in the sense that he made his presence felt and then got away. But in this, he's running away with his tail between his legs, isn't he?
Exactly. It's a difficult balance to strike with villains who recur frequently, because if they win too often, they just start to get boring. But if they lose too often, then they just look pathetic. And maintaining a balance so that they're constantly able to remain engaging, and in kind of situations you can be unsure what the outcome might be.
Yeah, it's better than, let's just say, in The Flash, where they have the same fight with the same villain every week. And it always ends the same way. We're never going to stop giving The Flash a kicking.
Yeah, Barry just lightning bolts into the room. It's over.
Yeah, they have a bit of a fight. the villain decides, I've had enough of this, escapes, see you next week. Which is, I guess, how these Saturday morning cartoon things used to go, isn't it? He-Man would fight Skeletor every week. The Power Rangers would destroy the monster that Rita created. You would just essentially do the same thing every week until there was a seismic season finale of some sort.
Yeah, G.I. Joe, very non-fatally fighting Cobra.
Autobots and Decepticons.
Yeah, they trade some barbs, fire a few shots, then they slink off.
A few lasers.
Another thing that, well, actually, as a counter to these examples, because the Clone Wars was effectively a Saturday morning cartoon. I don't know if it actually aired on Saturday mornings or not, but it's that kind of vibe. But it's this evolving universe. And I like the presence of Hondo and all his people give you scope to the universe. And I love the idea that the Clone Wars has created this opportunity for crime to run rampant, and everyone's making use of it, because you have Obi-Wan using Hondo as an informant in places and Jedi working with the bounty hunters and so on, just when it suits their purposes. It's a great idea, I think, to give the universe more depth in a way. And I did put in here the rise of organised crime part of Palpatine's plan, or just a side effect, and I don't think it's ever made clear whether he wanted this to happen or not.
I've been led to believe that everything played out just as he planned it.
I planned to explode and then find myself in this room with Rey and Kylo Ren. That was the plan all along.
But no, I agree. I think that a war or a serial about a war will feature the sides that are at war, but to go deeper, as you say, it's interesting to explore the opportunities that are arising for opportunistic types, space pirates around the galaxy as well. So it's cool to see the depth of that as well, because there will be all these smugglers and gun runners and people making a quick buck, as there would be in real life conflict.
It's something that happens in war, isn't it? Because you had the mafia during World War II, for example.
Yeah.
It was a big opportunity for them to gain more traction, and there's all sorts of examples throughout history where unsavoury elements can slink around in the chaos and do really well out of it.
And one of the Ferengi laws of acquisition is war is good for business.
Yeah, and a great portrayal was in Pacific Rim, where Idris Elba's character was working with the black market run by Ron Perlman.
Yes.
And it was, what do you mean you're working with this black market dealer? And he's like, last days of war, don't care. He can get me stuff. It's fine. I'll deal with it. And I feel like that's certainly where the Jedi, or some of the Jedi, are at this point in the Clone Wars. Better we use that resource when we can, rather than condemn it. And it's something that lasts longer than the Republic as well. This element still exists under the Empire, and is perhaps even more prominent in the Imperial times than it would be here, because there's much more opportunity to fly around under the radar, and especially helping the rebels and so on.
Yeah, because you have to remember that hardly anyone in the galaxy is actually directly involved in the war. Most of them are just to carry on with their lives. And because a lot of them may not feel too strongly one way or the other about which side in the war is in the quote-unquote right, and they really wouldn't have any qualms dealing with people on both sides of it.
Well, that was Han Solo's arc, wasn't it? He started off as a self-serving smuggler and then was made to care about what was going on.
Yes, after all of the formative experiences of his life happened in the space of a fortnight.
No, I'm talking about the real origin story for Han Solo, which was just Star Wars. You know everything you need to know about him in that movie, and then where he ends up is where he ends up. I'm not buying this younger Han Solo was sympathetic to the rebel cause all along, because no, he wasn't. He didn't care. Who's paying me? I'll do it, was his attitude.
It's like, and that was why he's a great character.
Yeah, but Hondo and his people are very much an example of that. Just the fact that this element will always exist, and like I say, I feel like it's more prominent during Imperial times where things are a bit more stable, as in the Empire's in charge, at least for a bit until the rebellion truly comes to prominence. But things like smuggling and organised crime and stuff, I feel like that would have just been a very lucrative place to be during those early days of the Empire.
Yeah, resourceful people will find ways to make a few credits.
Yeah, and Obi-Wan has a different ally in this episode, another Jedi. It's not Anakin for some reason. He's working with Adi Gallia, who I had to correct my notes about more recently than I'd care to admit, because I assumed she was the character that has 2 on-screen deaths, but it's not. That was Shakti. She dies in The Force Unleashed, and she dies in a deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith. I don't know if she has another more canon death than that, but I mistakenly thought that was Adi Gallia, and it's not. Although Adi Gallia did appear in a video game. She was the lead character in Jedi Starfighter. You played as her, flying the Jedi Starfighter. But she's here. She's an ally for Obi-Wan, and she dies. I don't think there's much more to her, really.
I don't think so.
I think the Jedi, by and large, are quite boring. And she's an example of why the Jedi are quite boring. I don't think there's anything to her. In these episodes, anyway.
I think, really, her only purpose was just to demonstrate how powerful Savage was. Basically, like, every episode in first season of Next Generation, Worf would get his arc to demonstrate how powerful this new alien is.
Which then becomes pointless the more that they do it, because everyone knocks Worf around. So
Exactly, yeah.
it just makes it look like he's not powerful rather than the alien is powerful. Everyone beats up Worf. I think they don't have Anakin here because Anakin would demolish Maul.
Yeah, just having a random expendable Jedi. And also her death giving a plausible reason to have a pretty cool moment of Obi-Wan dual-wielding lightsabers.
Yeah, which is not something he typically does.
Yeah, which was exactly what made it such an arresting moment. It's like, oh yeah, I can get behind this.
I think Addie was in quite a few Clone Wars episodes before this, though, but I can't remember anything she ever did.
Same.
Yeah, me neither.
But did you ever play as her in Jedi Power Battles on the PlayStation?
I did not.
Never played that game.
Did you ever play it, Angus?
No.
It is solid. It is a very difficult game. It's one of those two-player games, but you share a screen, so if the second player isn't as good as you are, then they can really make life difficult for you. I did have it on the PlayStation. I believe it's been remastered for modern consoles, because that's all they do now. They don't make new games anymore. They just remaster old ones.
This is not time for your soapbox.
She was one of the characters you could select. They were all basically the same. I think they had slightly different attributes. You could select Mace Windu with a blue lightsaber in that one as well. Crazy.
Blasphemy.
It was made during the era of the Phantom Menace before Samuel L. Jackson said, I have a purple lightsaber.
Because I am Samuel L. Jackson, and I demand purple.
I demand a purple lightsaber. And I want a complicated backstory about where I got the crystal that we'll never see on screen. I want all of those things. Yeah, it's a shame there's not much to say about poor Adi Gallia, especially when she dies in this, because it does feel a bit cannon foddery, but it also shows how hardcore the Clone Wars can be, where you have characters that have been in it for a while who end up dying. And maybe she did have other stuff to do in previous episodes, I just can't remember. She's presumably someone's favourite Star Wars character.
She's got to be someone's.
Oh, I liked playing as her in Jedi Power Battles. It's a shame she's dead. A film that she's not in, Phantom Menace. I assume she must be in the background of one of the prequel movies as well. Well, the only prequel movie she can be in is Attack of the Clones, because she doesn't make it to Revenge of the Sith. But is her death meaningful, at least for Obi-Wan? Angus, what do you think? Other than him using her lightsaber, do you think it adds anything interesting, or there's any meaning to it?
Unfortunately, not particularly. I kind of felt like as I was watching, maybe she'd had a lot more backstory in previous episodes, and that if I'd been aware of those, then I would have felt a bit more about this. But again, in this context, and not being familiar with the character, I've heard the name before, but not being familiar with the character in this presentation, just kind of came and went. And then, yes, as you say, Obi-Wan gets to have two lightsabers. That's probably about the most important part of it.
You could have read her Wikipedia article, which I assume has many, many words about stuff that she did before this.
Yeah.
I actually scanned through that article to actually remind myself of who she was, and it actually does. There's some really detailed explanations of missions and encounters. Scanned through it, I was like, I don't remember any of this. Are these in comics or books or something? Because I got nothing.
Yeah, that's the thing about Star Wars, is every character that you see has a horrendously detailed backstory, including the guy with the ice cream machine in The Empire Strikes Back.
Wilro Hood.
That's the guy.
I almost wasn't able to pull it from memory.
I think you purposely delayed it so it seems like you were trying to think about it, but it was right there.
You surprised me with it, and I was panicked for a second, thinking, how could I possibly have forgotten Wilro Hood? But no, here we are.
You've got his action figure on your desk.
Yeah, comes with the ice cream machine.
But no ice cream, unfortunately.
No ice cream.
Oh well, that's a shame for Adi Gallia then. Lightsaber fodder, R.I.P. Adi Gallia. One of many Jedi to fall during and after the Clone Wars. We have a bit of Palpatine action in this episode. He's actually got some stuff to do. I like that he's just trying to pretend that he knows nothing about Maul when Obi-Wan says to him, the Sith are persistent, they won't die. And he's like, yeah, I've heard that's the case. Not that I have any personal knowledge of such things, but yeah, I'll take your word for it. That's not exactly what he says, but close enough. He is very resistant to the notion of bringing Maul in alive, which I found compelling, because Maul has knowledge that Palpatine does not want getting revealed under interrogation purposes. It's maybe something that can be talked about in subsequent episodes, but I feel like Maul could have just made life very difficult for Palpatine if he'd really wanted to. Although Dooku told Obi-Wan that there's a Sith running the Senate and he did nothing about it.
I think Palpatine's so powerful that if he'd really wanted to do something about Maul, he could have just done that. So this is all part of the grand plan again. He's fine with him out there disrupting. It's all in hand.
Do you think we've seen the end of his plan yet, or do you think the Rise of Skywalker is just another part of his plan?
We're only experiencing Act 2 so far.
Somehow Palpatine returns again.
Yeah.
For a new trilogy of movies, where he's even more of a zombie. But in this, he's just, you should kill Maul. You should kill him. He's too dangerous to be left out there, and he would escape if you brought him in. And he would also tell everyone that I'm a Sith, and we can't be having that. I mean, it's very brief, but it's also very interesting. Andrew, what do you think of the use of Palpatine in this episode?
It was a good reminder of where Maul started when we first see him. Also, it highlights just how callous Palpatine is, because presumably he had been training Maul for years. Maul mentioned that he was going to be at the side of the most powerful being in the galaxy, so they'd presumably done enough together for him to have developed a certain degree of loyalty. But for Palpatine to just completely cast that aside because him being dead will make life easier for Palpatine really highlights how people's lives just mean nothing to him. There are things that only have value in terms of how it benefits him.
What you were saying there about Palpatine training Maul, you have to imagine that training was brutal as well.
Oh, undoubtedly.
It'd be very painful for Maul, I would imagine. There'd be lots of, I'm going to lock you in a room with these things that can kill you, and if you make it out, then you get your next lesson. That kind of stuff.
Stage 2.
Exactly. What did you think of Palpatine's usage in this episode, Angus?
It was quite nice just to see him kind of wrap it up. Again, this was me watching it as a trilogy of episodes. I don't think that there's a great deal to it. He gets to kind of smirk evilly at his desk and again look like he's in total control, which I am on board with, that theory. So yeah, I don't know if I've got a whole lot more. It's just a kind of tag at the end to me.
Yeah, and it doesn't really need to be any more than that, but it's a good acknowledgement of if you know, you know, as in if you're aware that Palpatine is Sidious and therefore was Maul's master, you will be intrinsically aware of their prior connection and therefore why Palpatine would not want Maul to be in a position where he can spill the beans.
Yeah. Smirk, smirk, wink, wink.
Yeah, good stuff, basically. Any last things on Revival before we move to our last topic?
Nope.
Not for me.
Oh, we've touched on some of this already, but let's just talk about Maul as a presence, I suppose. The return of this character is undeniably fan service, but is it substantial? And have they successfully made him a character in these episodes to therefore justify that presence? Or could they have just come up with a new character? Andrew, you mentioned the word Callus in relation to Palpatine. They could have come up with some Sith called Callus. Although that's the name of an Imperial officer in Rebels, isn't it?
Yeah, Agent Callus.
Yeah, there you go. They were saving it for later, that name. Angus, what do you think? Do you think this was enhanced by being Maul? Do you think he was a substantial character? And do you feel like this was worthwhile fan service?
I think for me it was more about the meta of it all because I'd heard so much about the return of Darth Maul and how it was part of something that I'd never watched. So I had a lot built up in my mind, a lot of ideas about what the spider legs were going to look like, how he was going to move, how he was going to fight on the spider legs. So yeah, to encounter it was fun.
You must have been really disappointed then on that basis.
And to experience it was fun because it's something I've heard a lot about. And yeah, I don't think it was disappointing per se. I just had different preconceived notions of what to expect. I liked the broken, defeated version of him. And as we said, he wasn't really much of a character before, so it was interesting to develop it that way. I thought his predicament was pretty dark, and as I said, it was pretty scary, I thought, for who I thought the show was aimed at. But as you pointed out, maybe it was bringing viewers along with them and aging up with them as they were going along with it as well. So I thought that was all pretty cool. I thought his restoration was a bit too quick. Again, we covered that, and I maybe would have liked to have seen a bit more of his broken psyche, and maybe that's because it refers back to what little history we have with him as a character. So to make it worthy or worthwhile fan service, you kind of want to have enough of a nod to where he came from before. But then, yeah, it kind of moves on and develops him into the crime boss or the gangster that we see him become. And again, I'm not familiar with where they take the story of Maul after that, but maybe that's more of a development and it's less about where he came from. So yeah, to me, being more familiar with what came before, having those expectations built up, and then finally getting to engage with it was quite rewarding.
That's a good summary. Andrew, what's your thoughts?
I don't think the actual episodes themselves were especially elevated by it being Maul rather than some random villain, but I do think they form a very good foundation for developing Maul as an actual character, rather than just this stoic badass with a cool design that the fandom latched onto. And having understanding of who he is just actually makes him more interesting and compelling, and goes some way to retroactively justifying his popularity. I remember the first time watching these episodes, after the narrative shifted away from Maul and Savage, I actually found myself looking forward to when they were going to return again, because I want to see where things were going to go with them.
I mostly agree with what's said there. Like I said earlier, he's basically a blank slate, so he is a new character in a lot of ways. He just bears some resemblance to a character that was previously introduced and did nothing in terms of characterization in his only appearance prior to that point. So in terms of taking this character that looks really cool and turning him into something, I think it was a great success. And I think they set up a really compelling antagonist that will ripple throughout this show and the sequel show, as it turned out, Rebels. So yeah, I think they did a really good job with that. And I feel like it is substantial fan service because they brought him back, they put effort into turning him into something and kept that character around for a long time. It's very weird that Dave Filoni in particular seems to have lost sight of that in the way that he does Star Wars now, because it just feels like it's a lot of empty fan service. I don't watch a lot of the Filoni stuff, but I watched Ahsoka and it was one of the most boring things I've ever seen.
It was dreadful.
Because it's however many episodes of them travelling to where the story is rather than actually telling the story. So it's a lot of wheel spinning. And there's some Clone Wars fan service in there as well that I found quite empty. They're still trying to convince us that Hayden Christensen can act, which is never a good thing, because he can't. No disrespect to the guy, he seems like a good guy, but a good actor he is not. So stop doing it, Dave Filoni, is what I'm trying to say. But it's very strange that he could be involved with something that is as good as this in terms of taking fan service and turning it into something meaningful, and what he's turned into now. It just seems like it's two different people. I don't know if Dave Filoni was actually directly involved in these episodes, but he was the showrunner at this point, wasn't he?
Yeah, so he must have had some overall involvement.
Yeah, it would be up to him whether Maul comes back or not, basically. So yeah, if only all fan service could be half as good as this, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, actually meaningful, not just superficial.
Yeah.
If it could be as cut in half as this and return with spider legs.
Indeed. And great shout out to Sam Witwer as well. The guy is a treasure. He truly is.
Agreed.
The last point I had was, how are the lightsaber fights in general? Visuals, I think we covered it. The lightsaber fights in this show are generally very good. I think they're very dynamic, although it doesn't feel like they're all that dangerous most of the time. You get that prequel problem of, it feels like they're trying to hit the lightsaber rather than hit the person wielding the lightsaber, which means that they're drawn out more.
I've mentioned this before, actually, but I once watched this video that takes a look at the final duel in The Phantom Menace, and it actually shows that the path of the blade when it was swinging, the opponent ended up parrying. If the blade had actually continued in its arc, it wouldn't have actually hit the person.
There's always the questions about how lightsabers work, because surely wouldn't you just turn it off and then turn it on again so that the blade misses your blade and you go right through it and then hit them in the head?
That should be a pretty cool technique.
Not very honourable though, is it? I feel like Sith would be doing that all the time.
Gotta watch out for that sort of thing.
It's just not the done thing. When you're fighting with lightsabers, you have to make it look as cool as possible. That's the way it is.
Yeah, because why else fight with swords made of solid laser?
Yeah, just shoot them a lot quicker, a lot easier. Anyway, that's enough on lightsaber combat from us. Any final things that either of you wanted to say before we wrap up? Or did you get everything that you possibly could ever want to say about these episodes?
Yeah, I think I made all the main points I considered. Really just wanting to reiterate, I really enjoyed rewatching these episodes. I think they're a good example of what made the Clone Wars largely so good throughout its run, or at least good enough that you could forgive the low points, and I actually might genuinely rewatch it again. So
next year you'll be armed with all the context that I've forgotten.
Yes, I will make detailed notes.
Angus, any final thoughts?
No, I think I've said Maul I've got to say.
Ah, there we go. How long were you waiting to deploy that?
Well, it was either that or Maul for one and one for Maul.
And you got that in too. All right, let's plan next year, because why not decide what we're going to be doing a year from now? That's always good to think about. I have two thoughts. One is pick up with what Maul and Savage get up to the next time in their final pre-cancellation Clone Wars appearances later in this season, in season 5, or the first episode of Rebels to start that off. So Angus, since you're the uninitiated, or slightly more initiated than you were last year, what do you want to do? Do you want to see what Maul gets up to next? Going to Mandalore and all that?
I feel like that's a bit of a leading question.
Well, you can say no.
I was leaning more into trying out something new, because we've done a couple of years of Clone Wars. But then if you're dead set on continuing the Mauliverse, then we could go there. It's a year from now.
I'm not dead set on anything. If you want to flip to Rebels for next year, we can do that.
Yeah, I think so. Keep it fresh.
Cool. So we'll talk about the 2-part premiere of Rebels.
Cool.
Andrew, will you want to be back for that?
Yeah, works for me.
You'll get to see Freddie Prinze Jr. voicing Kanan and so on.
We do indeed. And also, the climax of the second episode actually contains one of my favourite moments in all of Star Wars.
What will that moment be? Tune in next year to find out.
What a cliffhanger.
We're like a Star Wars show, funnily enough. Don't worry, cool stuff will happen soon. Not here, but soon.
As long as you keep paying attention to us, we will eventually be interesting, promise.
And that thing that we're teasing will absolutely not be a tease for something else. Okay, we're going to move forward in the timeline to the Imperial Times and discuss the first 2 episodes of Rebels. That's only 40 minutes instead of 60 minutes for you, so you'll be happy with that.
I always like less homework.
But not none. You like some homework.
Well, if we can get down to... No, I'm not going to say it. Having no homework would mean no podcast.
Exactly. And it could be worse. We could have to watch the Ewok movies again.
No, that's the kind of homework I can get behind.
I'm really glad we did those so that I never have to think about at some point we'll have to do those. They're done.
I feel like I've got Stockholm Syndrome or something with those. I just have to defend them, even though they're objectively trash.
That was a rough year. I almost didn't make it through those.
It's one of those times you must just ask yourself, why am I doing this? Yeah. This specifically.
Yeah, I did think that.
Yeah, and you can hear us ask that over and over again live during the podcast.
No one's paying us to do this. It seemed like it was going to be quite a funny idea last year, and now I'm 10 minutes into one of the Ewok movies, and I feel like I've been at it for 6 hours, and don't know when it's going to end.
The progress bar just kept getting longer and longer.
Yeah, how long are these things? Another tangent, but that's why I reject the notion of people saying that films should never be longer than 2 hours, because I have seen 3-hour movies that felt like they breezed by, and I've seen the Ewok movies, which I feel like I'm still watching them. Time is a construct, pacing is where it's at. There's another cliffhanger for us.
Very profound.
Yeah, very. Okay, that was our discussion of the first Darth Maul arc in the Clone Wars TV series. I would like to thank Ian Wright and 331 E-Rock for their supplied music. If you like what you heard, please do hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. The feed will supply you with more podcasts. Most of these things have rating systems built in, and that means you can leave us a rating. So, Andrew, how many stars should they give us?
Personally, I believe they should give us 5, since that's a nice positive prime number. Some somehow mystical, universal, galactic significance.
Indeed. And Angus, do you think a comment? Should we get one of those too?
Yeah, we love reading all your comments, so please leave us one.
Yeah, if you want to discuss the Clone Wars, Star Wars in general, anything really, you can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, or Blue Sky under Kneel Before Blog, or you can leave a comment under kneelbeforeblog.co.uk. You can also join us on Discord, where we have an engaged community of listeners, so please do join that and make it a plural. For more deep dive conversations about your favourite nerdy things, the odd interview, other things, you can always continue to join us on Kneel Before Pod.